Welcome back to another episode of Lost in the Farmer's Market Garden Shorts. Now this is a special episode because it is our 50th episode, if you can imagine that. Somehow we made it to number Big 50, and here we are, with a double header. Two plants of the same species that are very closely related. Now, I have talked up and down about these plants all year, and the bigger one is in the back and the smaller one's in front, though technically they weigh the same thing. Now, what are these strange and freaky plants we're talking about? Well, we're going to zoom in for a minute, just for your enjoyment. Anybody want to hesitate to guess? No? Okay, class, school's in session. These two plants are both Cuban oregano. The scientific name for the one in front, this one here, this lovely thing, which I sold some of at the market, and I sold some of the other one at the market as well, is Coleus amboinicus, cerveza and lime. Cerveza and lime being the variety. The big mammal gem in the back here that's all fluffy and shooting all over the place is Coleus amboinicus variegatus. Now, I know what you're thinking, but wait, I read the name is different in a book. Yes, the synonym is Plectranthus amboinicus with all the other stuff still attached. Now, Plectranthus is an interesting Latin combination word. Plectron means spur. Anthos means flower, which leads to the name of the entire family, the spur flowers. They're named that because even after the flowers fade, and unfortunately I've never seen these particular species ever bloom, the spur on the back of the flower remains, henceforth the name spur flower. Now, they have some famous members in their family grouping that I need to cover real quick. First and foremost, they are in the mint family, so we already have an idea of some of the big names they're related to, but when you heard that name Coleus, you thought, wait. Yeah, it's related to the common Coleus that you get at the garden centers, that also, much like these plants, if you cut a piece off and stick it in water, it should root. Gotta love that mint family aggression. Yeah. Now, Coleus is interesting, because it just has to be mentioned, because its name has changed a couple times in the last 20 years. We used to just know it as Coleus, species, and then whatever the variety it was. You know, Inky Fingers, Dragon Flame, blah, blah, blah. Right? Well, it got its name changed sometime in the early 2000s to Solanestemon scutelleroides. That does not roll off the tongue. They should have left it as Coleus. But then they changed it again to Plectranthus scutelleroides. Why? I have no idea. Some people with funding and a grant and too much dang time on their hands. That's my theory and I'm sticking to it. Well, anyway, they're still members of the mint family, but here's the most famous cousin in the Plectranthus grouping, because that's pretty much the whole family almost. Swedish Ivy, a common houseplant known for its medium green, glossy, hairless leaves and its foliage that releases an oregano minty flavor when rubbed. You see where this is going, don't you? Well, that one's scientific name is Plectranthus verticilliatus, which is a reference to its stem structure and its leaves. But it also has a synonym name, Plectranthus nummularius. I bet you some nummulariuses decided to change the name. They just need to leave this stuff alone. It's a Plectranthus. Coleus is in the Plectranthus family. Let's just get past it, folks. Now, some of your old publications will be using the original pronunciations, and that's just the way the game goes. Now, if you thought that wasn't confusing enough, here's something else for you. Cuban oregano has a metric buttload of alternative names. Mexican mint, Indian borage, country borage, French thyme, Indian mint, soup mint, Spanish thyme, Russian oregano. Now that Russian oregano is specifically for the one in the back with the variegation. Vicks salve. Now originally, I looked up Swedish Ivy just to see if Swedish Ivy wasn't the same as the one in the back, but it turns out that they are two different plants. There is a variegated Swedish Ivy, which is usually the plant in the back. People have too much time on their hands. But anyway, this is why you always check the scientific name to verify what you do or do not have. Because the variegated Cuban oregano in the back may be sold as variegated Swedish Ivy. And I remember this plant being called Swedish Ivy when I was a child. So there it is. Now, let's get to the nuts and bolts for a moment here. When it comes to Cuban oregano, nobody's exactly sure of where it's native from. But it's spread all over the world, sort of like aloe veras, except aloe veras are extinct in their native range because they don't need to be. It's kind of sad, but true. Now, they think maybe Africa or India, but there is no real hard evidence that I could find anywhere as to where they originated. But the plants are healthy and happy, and humans have this neat symbiosis thing going on with these plants, so everybody wins, I guess. Alright, rock on London, rock on Chicago. Now, it's hardy. USDA zones 9 through 11. We're 8A, so they're not hardy here, so I have to bring them in for winter, water them, take cuttings, do the aromatic, not oregano, smells like oregano boogaloo, all that jazz. They prefer a soil pH of 6.5 to 7.5. However, I should point out all references say they prefer neutral soil, meaning 7.0. I'm guessing, like most plants, they'll tolerate a range. So that 6.5 to 7.5 is an estimation based off what all the sources say. I don't know of any plants that hardline demand neutral soil. Never heard of it. That would sound pretty restricting if you ask me. Now, the exposure is full to partial sun. As you can see with the big plant in the back, well, you can't really see it. It's in a hanging basket that was hanging under my gutters, and it's gotten positively, well, let's just say that if it starts saying, "Feed me, Seymour," I'm in trouble. Let me zoom in a little bit there. See all that? It's sitting on a bucket, so you can see the height and shape difference. Now this one here is 2 years old. Let me zoom out a little bit so you can see that. And that is, and I want to say that's a 14-inch pot. It filled that up right quick, didn't it? And it withstood drought and everything. I really didn't aggressively water it, and it did just fine, which is pretty good if you ask me. Now, the height of Cuban oregano can be 12 to 18 inches, and the width can be 12 to 24 inches. Well, yeah, about that. That only really applies to the one up front with the short shrubby haggle, which is about 18 inches wide and about 18 inches tall, roughly, give or take. The one in the back seems to get to, well, I want to say that's almost, if you count the spread and the dangle, it's probably pushing 2 feet. That's that's actually if you're counting radius. If you're counting diameter, it's easily got to be 3 to 4 feet wide and about 18 to 24 inches. 18 to 24 inches tall and about 4-ish feet wide. Correction. Now, here's some other facts for you that I found interesting while researching this plant. It has a use in medicine. I couldn't find nutritional facts for it because apparently nobody's bothered to test it, but it has a use as a medicinal tea which soothes digestion, relaxes muscle spasms. It has antibiotic properties. It is an expectorant, a laxative. Why does it always go back to pooping? I swear, every herbal medicine is like, oh, by the way, it's a laxative, you're going to poop. I don't get it, but whatever. It may help expel kidney stones, and it may help relieve headache. Now, the antibacterial is interesting because I found out that there is some fact in that. This plant contains 2 compounds, thymol and caravacol. Caravacrol. Geez, that's hard to pronounce. And apparently these 2 compounds are antimicrobial in nature. They don't do anything about viruses, but germs? They apparently kick them in the ostrich sack. So, that's great. You know, it's a medical herb, you know. And consequently, you can see me gesturing in shadow because I'm using a new lighting setup. I forgot to mention that at the beginning. Now, why should you have these plants? Well, for starters, they're really, really easy. Like, super easy. You can see how much mass, biological mass, was generated in just one growing season. Look at all that. And soon I'm going to be trimming these and preparing them, and the little one is going to be part of soup kits. The big one is going to be trimmed down to make cuttings. I may try to squeeze it out of that planter and stick it in something else, like a filled soil pot, and just layer it on top and let it go to town. I haven't decided yet. We're working on that. But these two plants in the mint family, related to Coleus's, Swedish Ivy, I mean, what's not to love? They're pretty, they're to the point, they're basic. I mean, like, you know, if you want green foliage, these are your plants. If you want to attract unusual critters, these are your plants. I frequently see small lizards in these plants, green anoles, if you know what I'm talking about. They're a common lizard that's maybe about 4 inches long in the Carolinas. We'll see them around these parts. There are bigger ones down south of a similar but slightly different species. And I'll see them in this, and they'll be a deep green just like the plants. Which then I see them elsewhere in the yard and they're different colors. I've seen black ones. I've seen ones more of a yellowy tinge. So I'm thinking these are our local equivalent to chameleons to a certain extent. But beside that point, you get those. When and if these darn things would ever bloom, I'm sure I would get something to pollinate them. They're mint family, so nectar galore. And of course, the cooking. These plants are edible, both of them. They're 100% edible. They taste like a mix of oregano, basil, and thyme at the same time. No pun intended there. But you get what I mean. They're a lovely combination of 3 scents and flavors that realistically cannot be beat or replaced. Since they're a house plant, I can bring them in for the winter or take cuttings, and I get fresh seasonings regardless of what the weather's doing outside all winter long, from a plant that thrives in indoor conditions. This is why you should have this. We are in the middle of a COVID epidemic still, and then there's the election year, whatever craziness may happen in the coming weeks. And should something disrupt the food supply, you have this magical plant that can grow inside. Nobody needs to know. And you can season your freshly cooked wildlife forage with this. I mean, that's what seasonings were really invented for. They were invented, A, to spice things up, but B, to cover up the flavor of not so great food. So, I mean, edible houseplants. I think they are the next big thing, and I think you should have these. With all that said, folks, this caps off our 50th Lost in the Farmer's Market Garden Shorts episode. Woo, big 5-0. So if you like this episode, like, subscribe, please leave a comment. I'd love to hear what you think in terms of Lost in the Farmer's Market we're doing good, or things you don't like, or plant suggestions. Hey, you loser, why didn't you cover this plant? I would love to hear what you have to say. In the meanwhile, keep them growing, folks. And remember, that houseplant might just be edible. Oh, folks, whether you like it or not, I urge each and every one of you who sees this video to vote. Doesn't matter if you like the candidates or not. Go out and vote. We need everyone on the front line regardless. Thank you for that, and I'll get off my soapbox now. As always, folks, keep them growing, and if you don't hear from me, it means I've been eaten by a rogue Cuban oregano. Thank you.